Good evening, guys, and welcome back to the channel. Tonight, as always, sit back, relax, and listen to True Crime in the Dark. And before you settle off to sleep, please give this video a like, and let me know where in the world you're listening from. I always love seeing how far these stories reach. Some people fall in love online, a message here, a late night call there, and before long, that connection can feel just as real as anything in the physical world. But behind the screen, it's easy to hide who you really are. And sometimes the person you think you know is someone else entirely. In tonight's video, we're looking at two cases where online relationships turned into something far darker. Because not everyone behind a screen is who they claim to be. And sometimes, love isn't what it seems. She was a teenager growing up in Canada. She had good friends, a supportive family, and a life that on the surface felt steady and normal. Nothing about it suggested that one day she would travel thousands of miles towards something that would ultimately cost her everything. And then there was him, an older boy from England, someone she met online, living an entire ocean away. At first, it was innocent. Messages after school, late-night conversations that stretched on for hours, small gifts arriving in the post. The kind of awkward, hopeful connection that often comes with young love, where everything feels new and intense all at once. Over time, that connection deepened. He spoke to her every day, telling her she meant everything to him, that she was his world. At one point, he even had her name tattooed onto his arm, something that might have seemed intense to anyone looking in from the outside, but to her, it felt like proof that what they had was real. Months passed, and then years. What started as messages on a screen slowly became something that felt permanent, something that felt like a future. And eventually, she made a decision that would change everything. She booked a flight. More than 4,000 miles across the Atlantic Ocean, leaving behind everything familiar to finally meet the person she believed was the love of her life, the one who was supposed to make everything fall into place. And at first, it did. For a while, everything felt exactly as she had imagined, but it didn't last. Because the cracks that had always been there, the ones that are easy to ignore through a screen, started to show. Only this time she couldn't log off. She couldn't close the laptop, and she couldn't mute the conversation, because now she was there, alone, with him. Today we're heading to Chelmsford, a city just outside of London, to uncover a story that began over 4,000 miles away in Canada, and ended in a way no one could have imagined. On the afternoon of February 1st, 2022, police were called to a one-bedroom flat near the city center. When officers arrived, there were already serious concerns about someone inside. The situation was urgent enough that they forced entry into the property. Inside, they found a man named Jack Seppel. At first glance, it might have seemed like an ordinary moment. He was on the phone to his sister, something that under normal circumstances wouldn't raise any suspicion. But there was nothing normal about what was happening inside that flat. As officers began to search the property, the reality of the situation quickly became clear. There were signs of violence, blood in places it shouldn't have been, objects that immediately raised questions, including an Xbox controller stained with blood. And then, as they moved further into the flat, they discovered something far worse. A young woman. She was lying face down on the bed, and in that moment, everything changed. Chelmsford is often described as a quiet, comfortable place to live. A historic city with a cathedral at its heart, a commuter town feel, and a sense of calm that appeals to families looking for something stable and peaceful. But on that day, that sense of peace was shattered. When officers examined the scene more closely, they were met with a level of violence that was almost impossible to comprehend. The young woman had been stabbed, not once, not twice, but 90 times. And it didn't take long for police to realize who she was. She was the same person they had been called about. The same person they feared was in danger. Her name was Ashley Wadsworth. At the time of her death, Ashley was just 19 years old. She had traveled from Canada to the UK on a visa, chasing what she believed would be the adventure of a lifetime. One built around love, romance, and finally meeting the person she had spent years growing close to. And at first glance, it might seem like just another tragic headline, but the truth is far more complex and far more unsettling. Because what happened in that flat in Chelmsford didn't begin there. It didn't even begin in England. It started years earlier across the Atlantic Ocean and behind a screen. To understand how this story unfolds, we need to go back to the beginning. Back to Vernon, a city in British Columbia's Okanagan Valley, where Ashley was born in 2002. She was raised by her mother, Christy Gendron, and was close to her older sister Haley. Those who knew Ashley often described her as warm, affectionate, and easy to be around, the kind of person who made everything feel just a little bit lighter. She was active too. She enjoyed tennis, skiing, swimming, even horseback riding. And although her parents had separated, she maintained strong relationships with both sides of her family. Her father, Ken Wadsworth, remained very much a part of her life. As she grew older, Ashley also developed a strong sense of faith, eventually becoming involved with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It gave her a sense of belonging, something she seemed to carry with her wherever she went. By 2021, she had graduated high school and had been accepted into Thompson Rivers University. But like so many people during the pandemic, her plans were disrupted. Life had slowed, shifted, and become uncertain. So she decided to take a gap year. But for Ashley, this wasn't just time off. It was an opportunity. An opportunity to finally meet someone who had been quietly present in her life for years. Someone who had become part of her everyday routine through messages, late-night conversations, and hours spent online. That person was Jack Seppel. Meanwhile, across the ocean in Chelmsford, England, Jack appeared, at least on the surface, to be unremarkable. A quiet young man living in an ordinary town. And in a way, that's what makes this story so unsettling, because in the beginning, there were no obvious warning signs. Their story began back in 2015, when Ashley was just 12 years old. Like many teenagers, she would spend time online after school, messaging friends, scrolling through social media, and playing games. And somewhere in that vast digital world, she came across Jack. At first, their connection was simple. They were pen pals, nothing more. They talked about school, music, cultural differences, the small things that slowly build familiarity. There was even something a little romantic about it. Two people growing up together with an entire ocean between them. But while Ashley was outgoing and socially confident, Jack was different. More reserved, more withdrawn, and far more comfortable behind a screen than in real life. Still, the connection worked. In fact, it seemed to deepen with time. They spoke every day. Time zones didn't stop them. Ashley would wake up early before school just to catch him late at night in England, and stay up late just to talk a little longer. Before long, Jack wasn't just someone she spoke to. He became her person. The one she told everything, her day, her thoughts, her worries, her dreams. And as their relationship grew, so did the gestures. Jack began sending gifts, teddy bears, clothes, jewelry, small tokens that made the relationship feel real, tangible. Her family knew about him too. He wasn't a secret. Ashley's mother had seen him on video calls and at the time saw nothing alarming. He appeared polite, ordinary, just a young man from England, and in many ways, it all felt harmless, even wholesome. Two teenagers, building a connection across distance, growing up together in their own way. But over time, that friendship began to change. The conversations became deeper, the emotional connection stronger, and eventually, they began talking about meeting in person. By the time Ashley was 15, she was already asking her mother if she could travel to England to meet him. The answer, understandably, was no. She was far too young, but the idea never left her. Because in Ashley's mind, Jack was no longer just a friend. He was her future, the person she believed would make everything fall into place the moment they finally met. But while Ashley was imagining that perfect moment, cracks were already beginning to form, and she had no idea just how deep they would go. Like many teenage relationships, what Ashley and Jack had began to blur the line between something sweet and something far more complicated. But in their case, the tension didn't come from awkward dates or simple misunderstandings. It came from control. Even with an ocean between them, Jack's insecurities began to seep into almost every conversation. He wanted to know who Ashley was with, who she was speaking to, and which boys were around her at school. If she mentioned spending time with male friends, his tone would shift almost immediately. What started as jealousy slowly became something more intense. Conversations turned into interrogations. Jack would press her for details, accuse her of flirting, and convince himself she was hiding things from him. And because everything was happening online, these arguments didn't fade away quickly. They stretched on for hours at a time. At first, Ashley didn't see it as dangerous. To her it felt dramatic, emotional, but not threatening. When things became overwhelming, she would block him to create some distance. But the distance never lasted. If she blocked him, he would simply create a new account. If that didn't work, he would reach out to her through other people, even messaging her sister to get her attention again. And this is where the situation began to shift from unhealthy to deeply concerning. When Ashley was 16 and Jack was 19, he had her name tattooed across his arm. To Ashley, it may have felt like devotion, a grand gesture of love. But to her mother, it was something else entirely, a warning sign. And it didn't stop there. During one argument while on a video call with Ashley, Jack went into the kitchen, picked up a knife, and deliberately cut across the tattoo of her name. He did it in front of her, injuring himself in a way that was impossible to ignore. It was a moment that revealed something far more serious, a willingness to use violence even against himself to control the situation. And while Ashley was navigating this intense, emotionally draining relationship, Jack was living a very different reality. He was speaking to multiple other women at the same time. Some of them even knew about Ashley, referring to her as the favorite. At one point, one of Jack's local contacts reached out to Ashley during an argument, claiming that Jack had refused to let her leave his apartment. Think about that for a moment. Ashley, still in Canada, ended up mediating a situation involving another woman and her own boyfriend. What makes this even more troubling is that Jack's behavior wasn't new. It had a history. Court records later revealed that he had previously shown patterns of violence and control in past relationships, something Ashley had no knowledge of at the time. Former partners had sought restraining orders against him, and in at least one case he had breached those orders by continuing to make contact. His aggression extended beyond relationships as well. As a teenager, he had assaulted his own mother during an argument, dragging her to the floor. She too would eventually seek legal protection from him. But Ashley didn't see that side of him. She only saw the version he showed her, the vulnerable side, the one that seemed broken, the one she believed she could help. Her friends urged her to walk away. From the outside, the situation looked increasingly clear, but Ashley didn't see it the way they did. She believed that if she could just be there with him in person, things would be different. So instead of pulling away, she leaned further in. She worked more, saved more money, and focused on one goal, closing the distance between them. In her mind, everything would finally make sense once they were together. In November 2021, with a 6-month visa approved and her suitcase packed, Ashley said goodbye to her family at the airport. Looking back, her mother would later admit that she had a bad feeling about it. Not something she could explain, just a quiet sense that something wasn't right. But Ashley was 19, and she was determined to follow her own path. 12 hours later, she arrived at Heathrow Airport. After nearly a decade of messages, calls, and waiting, they finally met in person. There's even a photograph of that moment, Jack with his arm around her, both of them smiling, and for a brief second, it looks exactly how Ashley must have imagined it, like everything had finally fallen into place, but that moment didn't last. After leaving the airport, Jack brought Ashley back to his 1-bedroom flat on Pemberton Road. It wasn't anything special, a small, slightly worn apartment, but none of that mattered to Ashley. She was finally with him. At first, things seemed good. The first couple of weeks passed without any major issues. They explored London together, walked through the city, took photos, and tried to build a life in those early days. They even adopted a small gray kitten, which Ashley adored. When she called home, she showed her family everything. The flat, the streets, the cat, even Jack cooking meals. From the outside, it looked like she was happy, and in those early days, she was. Jack was attentive, affectionate, and eager to please, but it wasn't the full picture. It was the version of himself he wanted her to see. As time passed, the reality of their situation began to settle in. Neither of them worked. Ashley couldn't, due to her visa, and Jack simply didn't. They were constantly in the same space, with no routine, no structure, and very little money. Jack didn't have a strong social circle, and Ashley was isolated in a new country with no one of her own. And slowly, the same patterns began to return. Jack questioned who she spoke to. He discouraged her from meeting new people. Even small interactions would lead to tension. Ashley tried to stay positive. She hoped it was just an adjustment period, something that would improve with time. She even tried to introduce him to her church community, hoping it might give them both a sense of connection. But Jack had no interest. He wanted her at home, with him. Then just after Christmas, everything shifted again. On Boxing Day, Jack attempted to overdose. Ashley found him barely responsive and immediately called for an ambulance, a decision that likely saved his life. But the impact of that moment went far beyond the immediate emergency, because when Jack was discharged from the hospital, he wasn't just sent home, he was placed into Ashley's care. When Jack was discharged from hospital, the responsibility didn't end there. His medication was placed into a locked box, and that box was given to Ashley, which meant that, almost overnight, this 19-year-old girl, alone in a foreign country, was no longer just someone's girlfriend. She had become responsible for managing his care. And situations like this create something dangerous, because responsibility can quickly turn into guilt, and guilt can make leaving feel impossible. Once you begin to believe that someone might hurt themselves without you, walking away starts to feel like abandonment. And Ashley was now firmly trapped in that position. She didn't tell many people back home what had happened. Instead, she downplayed it, protected Jack, kept the details vague, partly because she didn't want her family to worry, but also because she didn't want them to hate him. In a way, she was trying to hold two opposing realities together, the person she believed he could be, and the person he was becoming. But the truth has a way of surfacing. Eventually, her sister found out, and when their mother, Christy, learned what had happened, she was horrified. She begged Ashley to come home, but Ashley refused, at least for now. For a short time, things seemed to settle, but it didn't last, because soon the violence shifted. It was no longer just emotional, it became physical. During one argument, Jack picked up a heavy beer mug and struck Ashley over the head with it, shattering it against her skull. And once that boundary had been crossed, it didn't go back. The outbursts became more frequent. Each one followed the same pattern, an explosion, followed by apologies, promises, and declarations that it would never happen again. Jack would say he was broken, that he didn't understand his own behavior, that he was sorry, but those apologies didn't stop what came next, because the cycle had already begun. Even Jack's family were aware that something wasn't right. In mid-January, they tried to intervene in their own way, taking both of them away on a short seaside trip, an attempt to reset the situation, to calm things down, and for a few days, it worked. But as soon as they returned to Chelmsford, everything came rushing back. Jack's behavior became increasingly controlling. He would obsessively go through Ashley's phone, monitor her messages, question every interaction. Eventually, he began controlling her social media entirely. She could no longer use it freely. He needed to be present, watching, reading her messages, deleting conversations he didn't like, even impersonating her if he chose to. And still, she stayed, because somewhere inside her, she was still holding on to the boy she had met all those years earlier, the one she believed she could reach. But by the end of January, that version of him was gone. What Ashley was living with now was something far darker. The arguments became constant, multiple times a day, often sparked by Jack's growing paranoia. And it wasn't just Ashley who could sense it. Her family and friends could hear the change in her voice, the hesitation, the careful way she spoke, as if she was constantly trying not to say the wrong thing, like she was walking on eggshells. Then came February 1st, 2022, the day everything finally broke. At around 8 o'clock that morning, a neighbor named Helen heard screaming through the wall. Moments later, there was a frantic knock at her door. When she opened it, she found Ashley standing there, barefoot, shaking, and visibly injured. Ashley told her that Jack had attacked her, that he had smashed her phone, And then, in a moment that only added to the horror of it all, she explained that he had picked up their kitten and thrown it against the wall. Ashley was terrified. She told Helen that she believed Jack was going to kill her because he had told her exactly that. When Helen said she would call the police, Ashley begged her not to. She was too afraid of what might happen if things escalated. So instead, Helen went to speak to Jack directly. And when he opened the door, he switched instantly, apologetic, calm, assuring her that everything was fine and that nothing like this would happen again. And somehow, the moment passed. Despite everything, life continued, but only for a few hours, because Ashley knew she needed help. With her phone destroyed, she quietly took Jack's and began messaging anyone she could think of, friends back in Canada, people she had met through church in England, anyone who might respond quickly. The message was the same each time, simple, direct. It's Ashley, I need help. It's an emergency. Back in Canada, it was around 3 o'clock in the morning when her mother saw the message, and when they spoke, everything came out. The abuse, the fear, the reality of what Ashley had been living through. For the first time, she said it clearly. She wanted to come home. Her family wanted that too, but there was a problem. COVID travel restrictions were still in place, and the earliest available flight was more than 48 hours away. Which meant Ashley had to wait. So together they made a plan. If Jack became violent again, she wouldn't stay. She wouldn't pack. She wouldn't hesitate. She would leave immediately and go straight to the airport. For the first time since arriving in England, Ashley had an exit strategy. But there is a dangerous truth in situations like this. When control begins to slip, that is often when the risk becomes greatest. Sometime just after midday, Ashley's messages stopped, following a call to emergency services made by members of her church who had also received her message. Police were sent to the flat. And what they walked into was something they could never have prepared for. Inside, there was evidence of extreme violence. Ashley had been beaten, strangled, and stabbed more than 90 times with a kitchen knife, in what Jack would later describe as a frenzy. But what he did next is what truly shocked officers. According to the evidence, what happened next was as disturbing as it was difficult to comprehend. After the attack, Jack hid the kitchen knife behind a radiator. Then instead of calling for help or turning himself in, he picked up his phone and he began to film. In the video, he stands there covered in Ashley's blood, calmly recording himself while she lay motionless behind him. During that recording, he confessed to what he had done, and then he stopped filming, not to call the police, not to ask for help, but to sit down and play Xbox. Detectives later found his controller still stained with blood. Around this same time, messages were being sent from Ashley's accounts, messages that immediately raised concern. Friends said they didn't sound like her. The tone was off. Something felt wrong. And they were right, because those messages weren't coming from Ashley at all. They were coming from Jack. Using her accounts, he reassured people that she was fine, while in reality, she was already gone. When officers arrived at the flat, they found Jack on FaceTime with his sister. He didn't resist arrest. Instead, he tried to explain it away, claiming he had gone psychotic, that drugs were to blame, that it wasn't his fault. But toxicology reports told a different story. There was nothing in his system that could explain a loss of control on that level. Only cannabis and prescribed medication, nothing that justified what had happened. Inside the flat, the evidence was overwhelming. Ashley's blood was found throughout the property. The knife was recovered where he had hidden it. And alongside it all, there was a trail of digital evidence. Messages, recordings, and the video he had made himself. Faced with this, Jack chose not to contest the charges. He pleaded guilty to murder. Later that year, at Chelmsford Crown Court, Ashley's family traveled from Canada to attend his sentencing. They came for justice, and the court delivered it. Jack Seppel was sentenced to life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 23.5 years, before he can even be considered for parole. Which means in all likelihood, he will spend the majority of his life behind bars. But no sentence, no number of years, can ever balance what was taken. During the victim impact statements, Ashley's family spoke about the reality of life without her. Her mother described sleepless nights and how holidays once filled with joy now feel empty. Her father spoke about how grief had changed him, how everyday life carries a weight that never lifts. And somehow, even after everything, Jack wrote letters from prison, blaming his mental health, his intrusive thoughts, apologizing for what he had done. What makes this case so deeply unsettling is how familiar the pattern is. It didn't begin with violence. It began with small things like jealousy that looked like care, intensity that felt like love, control that slowly tightened over time. And by the time those warning signs become impossible to ignore, leaving is no longer simple. When people ask why Ashley didn't leave sooner, the answer is never straightforward. By the time she traveled to England, Jack had been part of her life for nearly a decade. He wasn't just a boyfriend, he was her history, her comfort, the person she had grown up talking to. Walking away wouldn't have just meant leaving him, it would have meant letting go of years of her life too. And tragically, the moment she finally chose herself, the moment she decided to leave, was when she became most vulnerable. Because when someone who thrives on control begins to lose it, that is often when the danger is greatest. Back home in Vernon, Ashley is remembered for who she truly was, a daughter, a sister, a friend, someone who made people feel included without even trying. She laughed loudly, cared deeply, and had a kind of restless, curious energy that pushed her to explore the world. It's almost painfully fitting that she crossed an ocean for someone she believed in, because that was who Ashley was. She believed in people, even when she shouldn't have. Today, her family are left with memories of who she was and everything she should have had the chance to become. By now, she might have finished university, built a career, traveled the world, met someone who truly cared for her. Instead, all of that was taken. Ashley believed she was stepping into her future. But instead, she stepped into a situation defined by control, and when she finally tried to leave it, it cost her everything. Jack Seppel will spend decades behind bars, but no sentence will ever give Ashley her life back, and no punishment will ever heal what her family has lost. All we are left with is her story, and maybe that's why telling it matters, because if even one person recognizes those same warning signs and chooses to leave sooner, then her story might still help protect someone else. If you ever find yourself in a situation like this, please reach out to someone you trust. If there's one thing this case really highlights, it's just how real online relationships can become. We often think of distance as a barrier, something that keeps people apart. But in reality, when you're speaking to someone every single day, sharing your thoughts, your feelings, your life, that distance disappears. And sometimes those connections can feel even more intense than relationships in real life. But as this case shows, not everyone is who they seem behind a screen. And not every relationship, no matter how real it feels, is safe. This one was a difficult story to tell. Ashley was so young, and this wasn't a short-term relationship. This was someone she had known for years, someone she trusted, believed in, and built a future around in her mind. And that's what makes it so heartbreaking, because she didn't walk into something she thought was dangerous. She walked into something she believed was love. It's also a reminder that when someone is isolated, far from home, and emotionally tied to another person, leaving isn't always as simple as it sounds. And often, the moment someone decides to leave, it is when they are at their most vulnerable. Ashley Wadsworth was more than what happened to her. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend, someone who brought warmth and light into the lives of the people around her, and she deserves to be remembered for that. If you ever find yourself in a situation where something doesn't feel right, whether it's online or in person, please trust that instinct. Speak to someone you trust and reach out. Hey there, just a quick interruption to truly thank everyone who has liked this video and others, as it really helps me out a lot. If you like true crime stories told in the dark, please think about subscribing. I would really appreciate it. Now let's get back to the video. When 26-year-old Anna Repkina met Will Hargrove on a Russian dating site, it felt like the beginning of something real. She had just come out of a 7-year relationship and was ready for a fresh start. and Will seemed to offer exactly that. He was attentive, charming, and consistent, the kind of person who made distance feel smaller and the future feel certain. Before long, Anna made a decision that would change everything. She left her life in Russia behind and traveled across the world to Oregon, convinced she was stepping into a love story. But what was waiting for her there was something very different. On April 17, 2017, in a remote area near Alcia, Oregon, a local caretaker was walking his dog along a quiet, dead-end logging road when something caught his attention. At first, it didn't even seem real. Lying on the ground was the body of a young woman, her feet facing the road and her body angled slightly toward the forest, as if she had been left there deliberately. She was wearing blue jeans, black running shoes, a gray hoodie, and a black jacket. For a moment, he thought it might be some kind of prank, something staged. But when he got closer and reached out, the reality set in. This was no prank. Police arrived shortly after and quickly confirmed that the woman had been killed by a single shotgun blast to the head. Around her, scattered across the ground, were small pieces of debris, empty cans, papers, and trash that didn't seem to belong in such an isolated place. The woman was identified as Anna Repkina. Anna had grown up in Moscow, part of a close-knit, middle-class family. She had a sharp sense of humor, worked a steady job at IKEA, and loved music, traveling, and animals, especially cats. By all accounts, she was someone who embraced life, someone who believed in connection and in love. After her long-term relationship ended in 2016, Anna found herself feeling alone, and like many people do, she turned to the internet. That's where she met Will. Will Hargrove was a 26-year-old mechanic from Oregon who claimed to have a military background and a strong connection to Russia. He came across as confident and charismatic, someone who knew exactly what to say and when to say it. They spoke constantly, messages, video calls, long conversations that stretched across time zones, building something that felt real, even from thousands of miles away. He sent her flowers, he made promises, and slowly, he became someone she trusted completely. By December 2016, Anna decided to visit him in the United States, wanting to see if what they had online could exist in real life. But even that journey didn't begin smoothly. She accidentally booked her flight to Portland, Maine instead of Oregon, a mistake that caused delays and confusion, but she eventually corrected it and made her way to the right place. When they finally met, everything seemed to fall into place. Will took her out, introduced her to friends, and made her feel like she belonged. He was living in a family home in Portland at the time, renting a room from a couple with children, and Anna quickly became part of that environment. Just 10 days into her visit, Will proposed, and Anna said yes. It all felt fast, but to her, it also felt right. She returned to Russia shortly after to pack up her life, preparing to move permanently. Then, on March 1st, 2017, she came back to America, ready to start over, ready to plan a wedding, and ready to build a future with the man she believed she loved. But within weeks, that future would unravel in the most unimaginable way. Because when Anna's body was found on that remote road, the life she had crossed an ocean for was already over. And the person at the center of it all was about to tell a very different story. Determined to find answers, investigators began combing through the scene, paying close attention to the trash scattered near her body. Among it, they discovered something small but incredibly important. A KFC receipt partially pressed against a clear trash bag. It was dated just days before her death, and printed on it was part of a debit card number. That number led police to a man named Kevin Thomas. When detectives brought Kevin in for questioning, he initially seemed confused, but cooperative. He explained that he had been to KFC recently with a friend. Nothing unusual about it. But when they asked who that friend was, everything shifted. Because that friend was Will Hargrove. Kevin went on to tell investigators that Will had borrowed his shotgun just weeks earlier, saying he wanted to go out into the woods and blow off some steam. More concerning still, the gun had never been returned. Now the investigation was starting to take shape. Police went to speak with Will, asking how his trash had ended up miles away, near the location where Anna's body had been found. His answers were vague, uncertain, and didn't quite add up. Sensing something wasn't right, detectives brought him in for further questioning. But what Will told them next only made things more disturbing, because instead of describing a relationship, instead of acknowledging Anna as his fiancée, he claimed he barely knew her at all. According to Will, they had only been on a couple of casual dates. He described her as unstable, even going as far as to say she had posted online that they were engaged without his consent, turning her into what he portrayed as a stalker rather than a partner. It was a complete contradiction of everything Anna had believed. And as investigators dug deeper, another name began to surface. Michelle Chavez, a married woman with 2 children who had been involved with Will long before Anna ever arrived in America. When detectives confronted Will with the evidence, especially the fact that his trash had been found at the crime scene, his composure began to slip. The tone of the conversation changed almost instantly. What had started as casual denial turned into visible panic, and within moments, Will asked for a lawyer. But by that point, it didn't matter. Investigators already had enough to move forward. Will Hargrove was arrested for the murder of Anna Repkina. Following his arrest, police brought in Michelle Chavez for questioning. She admitted almost immediately that she had been in a relationship with Will, a secret one that had been going on for quite some time. But when detectives told her that Will had been arrested for murder, her reaction struck them as unusual. She said she was upset, of course. Anyone would say that, but there was something about the way she said it, something that didn't quite match the weight of what she had just been told, and it left investigators with the feeling that there was more beneath the surface. Now they had to understand the dynamic between all 3 of them. 2 years earlier, in 2015, Michelle had been living in Oregon with her husband and their 2 children. By her own account, the marriage was already falling apart. She described it as loveless, more like 2 people sharing a home than a relationship. It was around this time that she met Will. She was working as a cab driver when she picked him up one night, and from that moment on, something clicked. Will made her feel seen, wanted, important, and before long what started as a connection turned into an affair. But what makes this even more unsettling is what came next. In 2016, Michelle convinced her husband to rent out part of their home to Will, all while keeping their relationship a secret. As time went on, Will wanted more. He pushed for Michelle to leave her husband and start a life with him, but she refused to rush things. She told him it would happen, just not yet. To reassure him, she gave him her wedding ring, promising that one day they would be together properly. But for Will, that wasn't enough. And that's when Anna entered the picture. Will joined a Russian dating site and began speaking to Anna, building a connection that quickly turned into something serious. Whether he was trying to replace Michelle or provoke her into action is unclear, but what is clear is that he was now living 2 completely separate lives. During Anna's first visit to the United States, she stayed in the very same house that Will shared with Michelle and her family. Anna had no idea, and Michelle's husband had no idea. Will had told Anna that Michelle was nothing more than a jealous ex who couldn't let go. When Anna returned to the United States permanently on March 1, 2017, the situation became harder to hide. Michelle told Will that they could no longer all live under the same roof, forcing him to move out. So Will and Anna got a place together in Corvallis. From the outside, it looked like a couple starting their life together. But behind the scenes, nothing had changed. Will continued seeing Michelle, often spending nights at her house, while Anna was left questioning where he was. She would message his friends, trying to piece together his movements, sensing that something wasn't right. And she wasn't wrong. Will had been lying about almost everything. He lied about having a military background, the engagement ring he had given Anna. He told her it was a family heirloom, but it was actually Michelle's wedding ring. And the relationship itself, all built on deception from the very beginning. Eventually, Michelle discovered the truth about the ring through a Facebook post, and that's when things really escalated. On March 22nd, Michelle reached out to Anna directly, confronting her about Will, but Anna, still believing Michelle was just an obsessive ex, dismissed her completely, telling her to leave them alone. Michelle's response was cold and unsettling. She told Anna she would show her exactly what she was capable of. Just 3 days later, on March 25th, Will and Anna set out to get married. Anna wore the wedding dress she had brought all the way from Russia, believing this was finally the moment her new life would begin. But even that was built on a lie. Before the ceremony, they stopped at Walmart to buy wedding bands. While Anna waited, Will was seen on surveillance footage, not preparing for a wedding, but standing off to the side, on the phone, with Michelle. He was asking if he could come over that night. From there, they drove to the beach where the ceremony was supposed to take place, but the officiant never arrived. But of course, Will knew this, as he hadn't even booked an officiant. There was no marriage license, no booking. In fact, there were no plans at all. He made a call, pretending to check what was happening, and then told Anna the ceremony had been canceled due to illness. And she believed him. On the way home, they stopped at a McDonald's drive-thru. Surveillance captured the moment. Anna, still sitting in the passenger seat, still wearing her wedding dress, completely unaware that the future she believed in had never existed. Meanwhile, Will's manipulation was working. After the failed wedding, Michelle gave him an ultimatum. He had until April 19th to choose. If he chose her, she would leave her husband, but Anna had to be gone, completely. Will told Michelle he had already tried to end things with Anna, claiming she wouldn't leave. And slowly, Michelle began to see Anna not as a victim, but as a problem, someone who needed to be dealt with. On April 15th, just days before the deadline, Michelle was supposed to meet Will at his apartment, but he canceled. He told her Anna was back, and then he said something that would later become impossible to ignore. "I'll have this permanently solved by tomorrow evening." After that, his phone went silent. Michelle tried calling him again and again, leaving voicemail after voicemail, believing he had made his choice. But what she didn't know was how far he was willing to go to make that decision final.
I guess you made your choice. Okay. I'll let you be.
Why? I just want to know why. I'll let you be. But I just want to know why.
The following day, Easter Sunday, April 16th, 2017, everything began to unfold. Michelle Chavez was spending the day at her mother's house, trying to carry on as normal. Meanwhile, Will was dealing with something far more practical and far more revealing. His car insurance was about to be canceled at midnight due to non-payment. He called the company, trying to buy himself more time, asking if they could extend the deadline. They refused. If he didn't pay, the policy would lapse. Later that afternoon, at around 4:30 p.m., Will finally called Michelle. He told her he had been out at the coast, but now he had a problem. He said he had a flat tire and needed help. Michelle left her mother's house and drove out to meet him near a small convenience store in Alcea. While he waited, Will went inside the store, calm enough to browse, calm enough to make a purchase. When Michelle arrived, she asked what had happened. Will told her that he and Anna had argued, that he had said things he shouldn't have, and that Anna had left with her suitcases. It sounded like a breakup, nothing more. After talking for a while, the two of them got into his car, and then, something that doesn't quite fit the situation, they had sex in the front seat. When they were finished, they went their separate ways. Michelle returned to her family, and Will drove off. But instead of going home, he made a stop at an ATM. Using Anna's account, he withdrew $200. Then he went to another machine and withdrew $600 more. At one point, he even hugged a bank employee, telling them his girlfriend had just left him, playing the part of someone heartbroken, someone abandoned. But behind that performance, something else was happening. Later that evening, he deposited money into his own account and then called his insurance company again, this time making the payment in full, ensuring his policy would remain active. Everything was being taken care of. Everything, except Anna. Around the same time, Will began sending messages to Anna's phone, apologies, pleading texts, asking her to come home, asking if she was safe. But by then, Anna was already gone. The next day, April 17th, her body was found, and in the days that followed, Will's behavior became even more unsettling. He began spending money recklessly, buying random items, anything to distract himself. He even told a friend he was spending money he shouldn't be, just to keep his mind occupied. But then, things took a darker turn. His phone records showed that he had been messaging strangers online, asking impossible questions, He wanted to know how to time travel. He spoke about a mistake that needed to be fixed. In one message, he even offered to sell his soul if it meant he could go back and change what had happened. Meanwhile, investigators were building their case. The KFC receipt had already connected Will to the area. But now, more evidence began to surface. Another receipt, this time from McDonald's, dated March 25th. When they checked surveillance footage, they saw Anna sitting in the passenger seat, still wearing her wedding dress. A moment that should have marked the beginning of a new life, now preserved as part of a murder investigation. Further CCTV footage placed Will's truck heading toward Alcia on April 16th. His phone records confirmed it, showing pings at the exact location where Anna's body would later be found, between 4:35 and 4:48 p.m., right in the window of time when everything changed. Police also recovered the shotgun he had borrowed from his friend Kevin. Only Will's fingerprints were on it. Inside his vehicle, they found more evidence: clothing with bloodstains, Anna's credit cards, and at the convenience store where he had waited for Michelle, CCTV footage appeared to show what looked like blood on his head, marks that later disappeared. But one of the most telling details came from a message. Before being brought in for questioning, Will contacted Michelle and told her exactly what to say. He laid out a version of events, a story, one they were both supposed to stick to. At first, Michelle repeated that story to investigators, claiming that Will had picked her up and that they had gone to the store together. But it didn't take long for that version to fall apart. Faced with the possibility of being charged herself, she changed her statement and admitted the truth. Will had not picked her up when he said he did. He had lied. With that, the pieces finally began to lock into place. The timeline, the evidence, the contradictions. Will Hargrove was formally charged with murder, along with identity theft and multiple counts of theft. And as he sat in jail awaiting trial, the story he had tried so carefully to control was starting to unravel completely. In October 2019, more than 2 years after Anna's death, Will Hargrove's murder trial began in Benton County, Oregon. Over the course of a month, more than 70 witnesses took the stand as prosecutors laid out a case built on deception, manipulation, and a carefully constructed timeline that pointed directly at Will. They described a complicated love triangle between Will, Anna, and Michelle, and argued that this tension had ultimately led to murder. According to the prosecution, on April 16th, Will had taken Anna on a drive out toward the remote logging road. Once there, they believed he led her into the trees and shot her in the back of the head with a shotgun, before taking her bank cards and leaving her behind. The defense, however, told a very different story. They argued that Michelle Chavez had the strongest motive, portraying her as a jealous second partner who had grown increasingly frustrated with Anna's presence. They suggested that Michelle had issued an ultimatum, and that when Will failed to act, she had taken matters into her own hands. They claimed Will had loved Anna, that he had been building a future with her, and that Michelle was the one who had taken the gun and pulled the trigger. But as the trial unfolded, that version of events began to weaken. Michelle testified in court, admitting to the affair, but denying any involvement in Anna's death. She told the jury that while she had wanted Anna out of the picture, she had never wanted her harmed. Prosecutors pointed to the physical evidence. Michelle's fingerprints were not on the weapon. Her phone records placed her elsewhere. And meanwhile, the evidence against Will continued to grow stronger. They showed how after Anna's death, Will met Michelle and carried on as if nothing had happened. They presented footage of him withdrawing money from Anna's accounts, telling people she had simply left him, and they highlighted what would become one of the most damning details of all: the trash. The small, careless mistake that had ultimately led investigators straight back to him. In the end, the jury reached its decision. Will Hargrove was found guilty of Anna Repkina's murder, along with identity theft and multiple counts of theft for using her bank cards after her death. At sentencing in January 2020, he was given life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 25 years. He is now serving that sentence at Snake River Correctional Institution in Oregon. Even after the verdict, questions lingered. Will's legal team filed an appeal, challenging multiple aspects of the trial, but the conviction ultimately stood. And while speculation around Michelle never fully disappeared, there was never enough evidence to place her at the scene. For Anna's family, the outcome brought a measure of justice. Not closure, but accountability. Her ashes were returned to Russia, where she could finally be laid to rest, among those who had loved her from the very beginning. Anna came to the United States with hope. Hope to start over. Hope to build a future. And hope to be loved. Instead, she became entangled in something far darker, a situation built on lies, control, and manipulation. Will wasn't the person he had pretended to be, and Anna trusted him completely. Cases like this are difficult, because from the outside the answer can seem simple. Why didn't she just leave? But the reality is never that straightforward. Anna had known him for years. She believed in him. She believed in the life they were building together. And by the time the truth began to surface, it was already too late. Anna Repkina was more than a victim in a case. She was a daughter, a friend, someone who put herself out there with an open heart, hoping to find something real. And in the end, that trust cost her everything. Rest in peace, Anna Repkina. These stories stay with you because they don't start with violence. They start with trust, with connection, with the hope that you found someone who understands you. And that's what makes them so unsettling, because by the time the truth reveals itself, it's often already too late. If there's one thing to take from these cases, it's this: not everyone you meet online has good intentions. And sometimes the danger isn't obvious until you're already in it. If you've made it this far, thank you for being here. If you enjoy true crime told in the dark, don't forget to subscribe and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, sleep well, and remember, the truth always comes out in the dark.